She had $3 billion in her account, a private jet on standby, and a team of the world's most expensive doctors on speed dial. And none of it, not one single dollar, could make her 7-year-old daughter speak again. But on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, a man with grease on his hands and an old jacket on his arm crouched down in front of that silent little girl and said 4 words that no specialist had ever tried. He simply said, "You don't have to talk." And that was the beginning of everything. If this is the kind of story that stops you cold, the kind that reminds you what actually matters in this life, then you're in exactly the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss a single story on this channel. We put out new episodes every week, and trust me, you do not want to be the one who shows up late. While you're at it, tap the like button and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I genuinely love knowing how far these stories travel. Now settle in, because this one is going to take you somewhere. The morning Serena Whitmore turned 30, she sat alone in the back of a black car moving through downtown Manhattan and stared at her own face on the cover of Forbes magazine, America's youngest self-made female billionaire. She read the headline twice. Then she set the magazine face down on the seat beside her, looked out the rain-streaked window, and felt absolutely nothing. That was the part nobody photographed. The driver, Marcus, had worked for her for 6 years and knew better than to speak when she got that look. The one where her eyes went somewhere far away and her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He kept his eyes on the road. The city blurred past in wet gray smears. Serena pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass and watched a woman on the sidewalk struggle to hold an umbrella while pushing a stroller, and she thought about Olivia. She always thought about Olivia. Her daughter was 7 years old and hadn't spoken a single word in 5 years. People who didn't know the full story, and most people didn't, assumed Olivia had some kind of developmental condition. Serena had stopped correcting them. The truth was harder to explain and harder to hear, and she'd grown tired of watching people's faces rearrange themselves into that particular expression of horrified sympathy that made her feel simultaneously pitied and suffocated. The truth was this: Olivia had been talking perfectly fine until the afternoon of September 14th, 5 years ago, when a delivery truck ran a red light on the corner of Westfield and Maple and hit the passenger side of a car. Daniel Whitmore was in that car. He was coming home early. He'd texted Serena 20 minutes before it happened, picking up birthday cake, "Don't let Liv ruin her appetite." And those were the last words he ever sent her. Serena still had the text. She'd never deleted it. She didn't know what she was preserving it for exactly, only that deleting it felt like agreeing to something she hadn't agreed to yet. Olivia had been with Serena when the police knocked on the door. She'd been standing right there in the hallway, still in her shoes from school, eating a piece of cheese she'd grabbed from the refrigerator. She heard everything. She watched her mother's face do something she had never seen a face do before, and something in Olivia went quiet. Not gradually, not over days, immediately, like a switch. She didn't cry at the funeral. She didn't say a word at the graveside. She stood next to Serena in a black dress that was slightly too big for her and held her mother's hand and stared at the casket with dark, still eyes that looked, in Serena's memory, unbearably old for a 2-year-old face. The doctors called it selective mutism, triggered by acute traumatic grief. They had more technical terms for it, long clinical strings of words that Serena wrote down in a notebook and researched obsessively at 2 a.m. while Olivia slept down the hall. They gave her treatment plans, referred her to specialists, recommended therapists who worked specifically with children and trauma and loss. Serena hired every single one of them. She flew in a specialist from Stockholm. She paid out of pocket for an experimental therapy program in Boston that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. She read every study, attended every consultation, sat in on every session she was allowed into, and watched, week after week, as her daughter sat across from gentle professionals in comfortable offices and stared at her hands and said nothing. 5 years. Not one word. The offices of Whitmore Technologies occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower in Midtown, and by the time Serena arrived that morning, the lobby was already buzzing with the particular kind of controlled chaos that follows a major quarterly earnings announcement. She had grown her father's mid-sized software firm into something unrecognizable, a global platform operating in 31 countries with software that touched healthcare infrastructure, financial systems, and government logistics on 4 continents. She built it by working harder than everyone around her and sleeping less than was probably medically advisable. Her assistant Claire met her at the elevator with a tablet and a coffee and a look that meant there were already 17 things that needed immediate decisions. "Good morning," Claire said, falling into step beside her. "Happy birthday, by the way." "Thank you. What's first?" The Nakamura partnership call got moved to 9:30. Legal needs 15 minutes before that. Your board wants a statement on the Amsterdam situation by noon, and Dr. Pratt's office called to reschedule Olivia's Thursday session to Friday. Serena took the tablet, scrolled through 3 screens of notifications. Push the board statement to 1. Tell legal I'll give them 10 minutes, not 15, and find out if Dr. Pratt can do Friday morning instead of afternoon. Already asked, she can do 10. Fine. They walked through the open floor plan, and Serena was aware, as she always was, of the slight shift in the room when she entered. The straightening of postures, the lowered voices, the people who looked up and then quickly looked back down at their screens. She had never found a way to make that not happen. She'd stopped trying. She closed her office door and stood at the floor-to-ceiling window for a moment, looking out at the gray city below. Then she sat at her desk and got to work. It was what she did. It was the one place in her life where she knew exactly what she was doing, where the problems had solutions, and the effort she put in produced measurable results. The company had been her anchor for 5 years. Some days it was the only thing she was sure of. She picked up Olivia from school at 3:15. Olivia was waiting on the front steps with her backpack and her red and white sneakers, and her dark hair pulled into a braid that had come slightly undone on one side. She looked up when Serena's car pulled to the curb, and she stood and walked over and got in, and they looked at each other the way they always did. That long, searching look that Serena had learned to read like a language. Olivia's eyes said, "I'm okay. I'm tired. I missed you." "Hi, baby," Serena said. Olivia gave a small nod. Then she reached into the front pocket of her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper, unfolded it, held it up. She'd drawn a picture of a dog. Serena looked at it. "You want a dog?" Olivia shook her head. She pointed out the window at a golden retriever being walked by an elderly man on the sidewalk outside the school. "Oh, you saw that dog?" Olivia nodded, a small smile. "He's a good-looking dog," Serena said. "Very fluffy." Olivia put the drawing back in her bag and sat back against the seat and looked out the window, and Serena watched her profile. The small nose, the long lashes, the way she pressed her lips together when she was thinking, and felt the familiar pull in her chest, that feeling that had no name. Grief wasn't quite right. It wasn't grief, exactly. It was more like standing in front of a door that you knew was locked and pressing your hand flat against it anyway, every single day, just to feel if maybe today it was a little less cold. It was a Tuesday in November when the car broke down. They were on their way back from Olivia's Friday session with Dr. Pratt. Serena had lost track of the days that week, which happened sometimes. And Marcus was navigating through a neighborhood Serena didn't immediately recognize when the engine made a sound she had never heard a car make before. Something between a clunk and a groan, and then the whole vehicle shuddered and coasted to a stop alongside the curb. Marcus tried to restart it twice. Nothing. "I'm sorry, Ms. Whitmore," he said, and she could hear the stress in his voice. "I don't know what happened. I'll call the service immediately." "It's fine," she said automatically. It wasn't fine, but that wasn't his fault. She looked out the window. They were parked in front of what appeared to be a small neighborhood grocery market, the kind with handwritten signs in the window and a bucket of flowers sitting out front. The street was modest, working-class residential, she would have said, though she was aware that she wasn't always the best judge of these things. A few houses, a laundromat, a barbershop with a striped pole. Not a neighborhood she knew. And then it started to rain. Not gradually. One moment the sky was overcast, and the next it was simply raining, the way it does sometimes in November when the clouds have made up their mind. A cold and steady rain that started hitting the windshield in sheets. Marcus was already on the phone with the car service. Serena looked at Olivia, who was watching the rain with a neutral expression. "We're going to wait outside for a few minutes," Serena told Marcus. He turned. "Ms. Whitmore, it's raining quite hard." "I know." She paused. "We need some air." She wasn't sure why she did it. She would think about that later. Something about sitting still in the back of that stalled car felt suddenly unbearable, and she opened the door and got out, holding her hand out for Olivia, and they stood on the sidewalk in front of the grocery store and let the rain hit them. Serena had an umbrella in her bag. She didn't open it right away. She just stood there for a moment with her face tilted up and felt the cold rain on her skin, and it felt strangely clarifying. The kind of cold that reminds you that you have a body, that you are somewhere specific, that right now you are standing on a sidewalk in the rain in a neighborhood you don't know, and it doesn't matter who you are or how much money you have because the rain doesn't care. Olivia slipped her hand into Serena's. Serena looked down at her. Olivia wasn't upset. She was looking at the rain with an expression that was almost curious, her head slightly tilted, like she was working something out. Serena finally opened the umbrella and held it over both of them, though the angle was wrong and they were already damp. She pulled Olivia close against her side. That was when she heard the door of the grocery store open. He came out carrying a paper bag in one arm and an umbrella, a large, ordinary black umbrella, and he stopped when he saw them. Not a dramatic stop, just the natural pause of a person who notices something and actually takes a moment to register it, rather than looking away. I was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. Not in any striking way, just solidly, practically tall, the kind of tall that seemed structural rather than aesthetic. He had dark hair going slightly gray at the temples, a jaw that needed a shave, and he was wearing a canvas work jacket that had seen better days and a pair of boots with actual mud on them. He looked, Serena thought, like someone who did real work. His eyes went from Serena to Olivia, and he read the situation in about 2 seconds. The stalled car at the curb, the umbrella that was too small, the kid whose shoulders were already damp. He crossed the sidewalk without hesitation. "Here," he said. He was already holding his umbrella over Olivia before he'd finished the word. Kids shouldn't have to face storms alone. It was the most straightforward thing anyone had said to her in years. Serena blinked. "Thank you. Our car broke down. Someone's coming." He nodded, shifting the umbrella so it covered both of them more fully. Now he was the one getting rained on, and he didn't seem to notice or care. "You're welcome to wait inside," he said. He tilted his head toward the grocery store. "Maria keeps the coffee on until close. She won't mind." Serena was about to decline, reflexively, automatically, the way she declined things, because she didn't need help. She never needed help. She had people for everything. And then she felt Olivia move beside her. She looked down. Olivia was looking at the man, not with her usual wariness, not with the careful blankness she wore around strangers. She was looking at him the way she sometimes looked at things that confused her in an interesting way. A little sideways, like she was approaching from an angle. Curious. And she was almost smiling. Not quite, but almost. "We'll wait inside," Serena said. "Thank you, Mr. Callahan," he said. "Ethan Callahan." He shifted the grocery bag to his other arm, extended a hand briefly, then seemed to think better of it since both of them were holding things. He half smiled instead, a crooked, slightly self-deprecating expression, and held the door open. Serena walked through first, Olivia's hand in hers, and as she crossed the threshold she thought, "He didn't recognize me." It wasn't vanity. She didn't particularly need to be recognized. But it had been so long since she'd had a conversation with a stranger who didn't know what her name meant that the absence of it felt noticeable. Disorienting, almost. Like taking off shoes you'd been wearing so long you'd forgotten you had them on. Oh. The inside of the grocery store was small and warm and smelled like coffee and the ghost of something baked hours ago. A woman in her 60s behind the counter looked up when they came in, and her eyes moved from Ethan to Serena and Olivia with the immediate alertness of someone used to knowing everyone who walks through their door and flagging the exceptions. "Car trouble?" the woman, Maria presumably, asked. "Engine gave out," Ethan said, setting his bag on the counter. "Mind if they wait?" "Of course not. Coffee's hot." She was already reaching for cups. "You want regular or decaf, honey?" she asked Serena. "Regular, thank you." "And for the little one, I got hot cocoa. I make it with real milk." Olivia looked at Serena, a question in her eyes. "Sure," Serena said. They settled at a small table near the window, 2 mismatched chairs and a wooden surface with rings from 100 coffee cups worn into it. Ethan sat at the counter with his bag and talked to Maria in the easy shorthand way of people who have known each other for years. Serena listened without meaning to. He'd picked up groceries for an elderly neighbor, she gathered, a Mrs. Kowalski who had trouble getting out in bad weather. He was asking Maria to set aside certain items every Tuesday, and Maria was telling him what she could and couldn't order reliably, and they went back and forth on the specifics with a kind of pragmatic warmth that Serena found herself watching the way you watch a fire. Not because you're cold, necessarily, but because there's something in it that draws you. Olivia had both hands wrapped around her cup of cocoa. She was looking at Ethan. He turned and caught her looking. He didn't make a big deal of it. Didn't do the thing adults often did with silent children. The exaggerated expressions, the high-pitched voices, the performing of friendliness. He just raised his eyebrows slightly, in the way of one person acknowledging another, and gave a small nod. "I see you." And then he went back to talking to Maria. Olivia kept looking at him, but now there was something different in her expression, something that Serena recognized, though she hadn't seen it in a long time. It was interest. Real, specific, uncomplicated interest. Serena felt something tighten in her throat that she didn't want to name. Her phone buzzed. Marcus. The car service had arrived. She looked at it, then looked at Olivia, who was still watching Ethan with that quiet attention, her cocoa cooling in her hands. She typed back, 2 more minutes. Then she set the phone down and watched her daughter watch a stranger, and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Something that might have been hope. She didn't hold it too carefully. She'd learned not to. But she let herself feel it, just for a moment, the fragile, specific weight of it, before she stood, helped Olivia into her coat, and walked toward the counter to thank Maria and settle what she owed. Ethan was putting on his jacket. "Thanks for the umbrella," Serena said. "Sure." He picked up his bag. Then, almost as an afterthought, he looked down at Olivia. "You stay dry out there." Olivia looked up at him, and she smiled. Not almost anymore. She smiled, small and private and real, the kind of smile that comes from somewhere genuine rather than from obligation. And it was the most purely itself thing Serena had seen her daughter do in 5 years. Serena turned toward the door quickly so neither of them would see her face. Outside, in the cold November rain, she pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose and did not cry. She was very good at not crying in public. She had years of practice. But her hands, holding the umbrella, were not entirely steady. She thought, "Who is that man?" She thought, "What just happened?" She had no answer for either. She just walked to the car, her daughter's warm hand in hers, and got in, and sat back, and watched the grocery store window until it disappeared behind a turn. The car service driver didn't say much on the way home, which suited Serena fine. Marcus sat up front and made a call he kept quiet, and Serena sat in the back with Olivia pressed against her side, the girl's damp hair smelling like rain and something faintly sweet from the cocoa. And Serena stared out the window and tried to talk herself out of what she was feeling. It was nothing. It had been a 20-minute wait in a grocery store during a rainstorm. Olivia smiled at a stranger. Children smiled at strangers sometimes. It didn't mean anything specific had happened, but she kept seeing it. That small, unguarded smile. The way Olivia had looked at Ethan Callahan without any of the careful distance she maintained with everyone else. The therapists, the specialists, the well-meaning family friends who crouched down and spoke to her in soft, deliberate voices, like she was made of something breakable. The way he'd looked back at her without performing anything, just a nod. "I see you." And then he'd turned away, which was somehow exactly right, and Serena didn't know how a person knew to do that instinctively. She looked down at Olivia. The girl was already half asleep against her arm, her mouth slightly open, one hand curled loosely in her lap. Serena pulled her closer and looked back out the window and made herself stop thinking about it. She was mostly successful. She ran a background check on him. She wasn't proud of it, but she did it. Not that night. She wasn't that far gone. But 3 days later, when she'd told herself twice that she wasn't going to, and then found herself, at 11:15 on a Thursday evening, opening a browser and typing a name into the search bar of the private security firm she kept on retainer. Ethan James Callahan, 37 years old, former United States Navy, enlisted at 19, served for 14 years, honorably discharged. She couldn't get the classified details of his service record. The firm was good, but not that good. But the outline was there. Multiple deployments. Commendations she couldn't fully see the context of. He'd been in places she recognized from news cycles during years. She'd been building her company and trying not to think too hard about what was happening in the world. After the military, he'd come back to the city where he was born. Took a job as a maintenance supervisor for a property management company covering 6 residential buildings in the Greystone neighborhood. The same neighborhood where the grocery store was, she noted, though she told herself that wasn't relevant. He'd been there for 3 years. His wife's name had been Patricia. She died of an aggressive form of leukemia 2 years after Ethan came home from the service. Their son, Noah, was 8 years old now. He went to Greystone Elementary, 6 blocks from the neighborhood market. There was no civil record, no criminal record, not so much as a parking violation. Serena closed the browser and sat at her desk in the dark for a moment. She wasn't sure what she'd been looking for. A reason to write off what she'd seen as meaningless, maybe. Some obvious flaw in the picture that would let her file the whole thing away neatly. Instead, she had a profile of a man who had, by any reasonable measure, been through as much loss as she had, and who was apparently spending his Tuesdays picking up groceries for an elderly neighbor in the rain. She went to bed. She didn't sleep well, but that wasn't new. She saw him again 11 days later. She hadn't planned it. That was the thing she would tell herself afterward, and it was true, though she was also aware that she had started taking a different route on the Saturday morning walks she'd recently started doing with Olivia. Walks that took them through the Greystone neighborhood rather than the park near their building, and that she hadn't examined her reasoning for this very closely. It was a cold Saturday, the kind of sharp, clear November cold that made the air taste like metal, and Olivia was bundled in a yellow coat with the hood up that made her look slightly like a small submarine. They were walking past the neighborhood park, a worn, municipal thing with a chain-link fence and equipment that needed paint and a couple of concrete benches that had seen decades of use, when Serena heard a kid's voice. "Dad, you're doing it wrong." "I'm not doing it wrong." "You are, though. The chain goes like this." "Noah, I've fixed a chain before." "Not on this bike. On this bike it goes different." She looked toward the sound. Near the fence, a man was crouched beside a bicycle, and a boy about Olivia's age was standing over him with the particular expression of a child who is absolutely certain they are correct and is trying to be patient about it. The man was Ethan. He was in a gray sweatshirt and jeans and work boots, and he had grease on his left hand, and he was looking at the bicycle chain with the focused, slightly irritated expression of someone who is not going to admit the kid might have a point. Olivia stopped walking. Serena looked down at her. Olivia was watching the boy and the bicycle with that same sideways attention she'd had in the grocery store. "We can keep going," Serena said, though she didn't move. Olivia looked up at her, then back at this boy. Then she took one deliberate step toward the fence. It was, for Olivia, the equivalent of running across the room. Serena followed. Ethan glanced up when they got closer. He registered Serena with a flicker of recognition, and then he looked at Olivia the same way he had the first time. Straightforward, uncomplicated, no performance. "Hey," he said, to Olivia, not to Serena. Olivia looked at the bicycle. "Chain came off," Ethan said conversationally, like he was just talking to whoever happened to be standing there. "My son has opinions about how to fix it." "Because I'm right," Noah said, not looking up. Then he did look up, and he saw Olivia, and his expression shifted with the uncomplicated directness of an 8-year-old. "Hi. Do you know how to fix a bike chain?" Olivia shook her head. "Neither does my dad, apparently." "Noah. I'm just saying." Olivia's mouth moved in a way that might have been the beginning of a sound, though no sound came. But she crouched down beside Noah and looked at the chain, and Noah, who apparently took this as a reasonable response, crouched beside her and began explaining, with considerable confidence, where the chain was supposed to sit and why his father had it wrong. Ethan sat back on his heels and looked at Serena. "Callahan," he said. "From the grocery store." "I remember." She paused. "Whitmore." "Serena." He nodded. He didn't say, "Oh, the Whitmore Technologies person," or change his posture, or do any of the things people did when they connected the name to the magazine covers. He just nodded, the way a person nods when someone introduces themselves and they're filing the name away for practical use. "Your car get sorted out?" "It did. Thank you again for the umbrella." "Sure." He looked at Noah and Olivia. Noah was talking steadily. Olivia was listening, and she'd picked up one end of the chain and was examining it with the serious expression she gave things she was genuinely curious about. "Your daughter doesn't talk much," Ethan said. Not a question, not a careful, hedged observation the way people usually offered it. Just a statement of what he'd noticed. Serena braced for the follow-up. The "is she okay?" the "has she always been like that?" The pivot into well-meaning suggestions. It didn't come. Ethan looked back at the bicycle. "Noah talked so much from age 2 to about 4 that I genuinely worried something was wrong with me. Turns out some kids just have a lot to say right out of the gate, and some don't." He picked up the wrench. "Neither way's a problem." Serena looked at him. He wasn't making a point. He wasn't performing sensitivity for her benefit. He was just talking, the way a person talks when they're comfortable and not trying to manage anyone's feelings. "She used to talk," Serena said. She didn't know why she said it. She didn't usually say it to people she'd met twice. Ethan glanced at her. "I figured," he said, and left it there. They stood in the cold morning, their kids crouched over a bicycle chain, and the silence between the two adults was the comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't demand filling. After a few minutes, Noah said, "Okay, try it now." And Ethan crouched back down and turned the pedal, and the chain caught and held. "See?" Noah said. "I see. I was right." "You were right." Ethan stood, wiping his hand on his jeans. "Don't make it weird." Noah grinned. He looked at Olivia. "You want to try riding it? I can show you a good part of the path. It's flat, so it's not hard." Olivia looked at Serena. Serena looked at her daughter's face, at the careful wanting in it, and she said, "Go ahead, stay where I can see you." And Olivia went. Serena and Ethan sat on one of the concrete benches and watched their kids navigate the winding path that ran along the inside of the park fence. Noah rode his bike in slow, patient circles while Olivia walked beside him, and they appeared to be having a conversation of some kind. Noah talking, Olivia occasionally gesturing, both of them apparently understanding each other fine. "He's a good kid," Serena said. "He has his moments." Ethan had his forearms on his knees, watching the kids with the relaxed, steady attention of someone who is always tracking without making it obvious. Good and exhausting in equal measure. He gets the exhausting from his mother's side. It was said lightly, easily, without self-pity or invitation. Serena recognized the register. She used it herself sometimes, the way you talk about people you've lost when you don't want to make the conversation about loss, but the person was real, and it feels dishonest to pretend they weren't there. "How long?" she asked. 2 years in March." He paused. "You?" 5 years in September." He nodded. Neither of them said, "I'm sorry." They'd both heard it enough times that it had worn smooth, like a stone that's been handled so often it's lost its edges. The absence of it, between two people who understood exactly why they were skipping it, was its own kind of acknowledgement. Noah had stopped his bike at a bend in the path and was explaining something to Olivia, something that involved gesturing at the sky and then pointing at the ground, some piece of 8-year-old logic that Serena couldn't follow from a distance. Olivia was listening with her head tilted. "She smiled at you," Serena said, "at the store. I don't want to make that into a bigger thing than it is, but I want you to know it was—" She stopped, tried again. "She doesn't do that a lot. With people she doesn't know." Ethan looked at her. She seemed fine, like a regular kid who doesn't feel like talking. Most people don't read it that way. Most people are trying too hard to get a read on it. He shrugged. "Kids know when you're working at them. It makes them go sideways." Serena was quiet for a moment. "That's—" she exhaled. "Yeah, that's exactly right, actually. Her therapists are good people. But she always knows they're trying to get her to do something." "Sure. She's 7, not slow." He said it without judgment, just as an observation. Kids have good antennas for when an adult has an agenda, even a kind one. Serena looked at the park, the old equipment, the bench they were sitting on that had a long crack running down the back of it, repaired at some point with a bolt and washer that had started to rust. "This park has seen better days," she said. Ethan looked around. "Been coming here since I was about Noah's age. It looked pretty much like this then, too." He paused. "City's been talking about renovating it for 4 years. You know how that goes. What would it take? Realistically?" He glanced at her. "You asking because you're curious or because you're about to do something about it?" She looked back at him, and she felt absurdly, slightly caught. I don't know yet. He studied her for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not suspicious, not impressed, just assessing, the way a person looks at something they haven't decided about yet. Then he looked back at the kids. New surface on the path. Equipment is old, but structurally the frames are still good. They just need fresh paint and some replacement parts. The drainage on the south end is a problem. Floods every winter. Couple of benches. Better lighting so it's usable at dusk. He ticked through it like a list he'd thought about before, which she got the sense he had. Nothing that would cost a fortune. What it'd really take is somebody who actually follows through. A lot of people say they'll do things, Serena said, not quite to him. Yeah, he said. They do. She didn't call her foundation team until Monday. She told herself she was thinking it through, which was partly true. She did think through the logistics and the most efficient way to move quickly on a city park's variance, and whether the property management structure of the park complicated the permitting. These were legitimate things to think through. She also just thought about it. The cracked bench, the rust on the bolt, the kids on the path in the cold. She called Margaret Osei, who ran the Whitmore Family Foundation, on Monday at 8:15. I want to do something for a park in Greystone, the one on Callaway Street. Full renovation, proper drainage fix, new equipment, lighting. I want it done before spring. Margaret was quiet for a second. That's a fast timeline. I know. What do we need to move it? Margaret, who had worked with Serena long enough to know that what do we need was not an abstract question, started running through the practical pieces. City variance, neighborhood community board, environmental survey, if the drainage work went deep. It would take a few weeks to get the right people in the room. It was doable by spring if they started immediately. Start immediately, Serena said. Any particular reason for Greystone? Margaret asked. Not prying. She always asked because knowing the context helped her do her job. Serena paused. My daughter went to that park. Think it matters. Which was true. So, she started taking Olivia to the park on Saturday mornings. This was easy to justify. They needed fresh air. The route was pleasant. Olivia had responded well to being outside. And she didn't examine it beyond that for the first 2 weeks. By the third Saturday, she knew Ethan and Noah were usually there between 9 and 10, which she knew because they had been there the past 2 Saturdays. And she told herself this was incidental information she simply happened to have. They fell into something that wasn't quite a routine, because calling it a routine would mean acknowledging she was arranging for it, which she wasn't quite ready to do. But they were there on the same cold mornings, and their kids orbited each other with the immediate practical ease that some children have, where they simply begin operating as though proximity equals alliance. And they walked circuits of the path, and Noah explained things to Olivia with great authority. The structural integrity of different trees, the correct technique for skipping stones on the puddle that formed near the south drainage, the best spots in the park where the wind was less bad. And Olivia listened and drew pictures in a small notebook she'd started carrying and showed them to Noah, who took them with the seriousness of a fellow professional examining a colleague's work. She still hadn't spoken. Not to Noah, not to Ethan, not in front of anyone. But she was present in a way that was different from the careful containment Serena usually saw. She laughed sometimes, silent laughter, her whole face involved, her shoulders shaking, and she initiated things, which she rarely did. She'd arrive at the park and immediately look around until she spotted Noah, and then walk directly toward him, which Serena watched with a feeling she couldn't quite contain behind her ribs. Ethan, for his part, was consistent in the specific way Serena came to understand was simply his nature. He showed up. He paid attention without pressing. He spoke to Olivia exactly as he spoke to Noah, directly, without the performance of gentleness, without the slightly louder, clearer enunciation people often defaulted to with silent children, as if silence implied difficulty of hearing. He asked her questions sometimes, in the way you ask a question when you're not particularly attached to whether it gets answered. Cold enough for you? Or, Noah says you draw maps, that true? Olivia would nod, or tilt her hand, sort of, or hold up her notebook. And Ethan would look at whatever she showed him and respond to it on its actual merits, saying, that's a good path layout, you got the south end right, or that doesn't look like a map, that looks like a monster, and waiting to see if she laughed, which she usually did. He was, Serena thought, one of the most naturally decent people she had ever spent time around. Not in a performed, deliberate way. In the way that some people are just built a certain direction, and that direction happens to be toward other people, and they don't seem to be aware of it as a choice. She found it both comforting and, in a way she didn't entirely understand, slightly unnerving. She had spent 5 years in environments where she understood the rules, where people wanted things from her that were identifiable and negotiable. Ethan didn't seem to want anything in particular, which should have made him easier to deal with and somehow made him harder. She told him about the park renovation on the fourth Saturday. Not as a presentation. She wasn't pitching him, and she told herself she wasn't looking for approval, though she was aware there was something she was looking for in his reaction, something she would have found embarrassing to name. "The foundation is moving on the Callaway Street Park," she said. They were on the bench, the cracked one, which she'd started thinking of as their bench, which she also told herself was not a thing she was doing. "The variance came through faster than we expected. They're starting the drainage work next month." He looked at her. "You actually did it." "I said I'd look into it." "People say they'll look into things," he said. Not an accusation, just a fact, which she'd noticed was how he delivered most things. "Then they look into it and it's complicated and there's a reason it doesn't happen." He paused. "How'd you get the variance through that fast?" She gave him a look. "Right," he said. "Whitmore." A pause. "Is it going to be good, or is it going to be one of those situations where the playground equipment costs a lot and looks impressive for 3 months and then falls apart because somebody bought it wrong?" "The equipment is from a manufacturer that supplies school districts. 15-year warranty on the frames." "What about the drainage?" "Civil engineer did the assessment last week. They're going in 2 feet deeper than the current system. It won't fix the slope completely, but it should handle everything short of a 100-year flood." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the park with that same steady, assessing quality he brought to things. Then, "The community board's going to want to be involved. There's a woman named Dolores who runs the Greystone Neighbors group. She'll lose her mind if this happens without a meeting. Margaret already reached out to her. She's coming in Wednesday." Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically, just a small, involuntary adjustment in the set of his jaw. "You talked to Dolores?" "My foundation director did." "Dolores is—" He stopped. "She has opinions." "Margaret can handle opinions." Dolores once held up a streetlight installation for 8 months because the bulb color wasn't right for the neighborhood aesthetic. "We're using warm-tone LEDs." He looked at her. "Did you already know about the streetlight situation?" "Margaret is thorough." He laughed. It was the first time she'd heard him actually laugh, and it was slightly reluctant, like it caught him off guard. And it was a good laugh. Not polished, not social, just a real sound that came out because something was genuinely funny to him. "Okay," he said. "All right." "I was thinking," Serena said, and then she stopped because she hadn't fully worked out how to say the next part without it sounding like something she'd decided and packaged. She tried again. "The foundation can fund it, but it would be better, for the park, for the neighborhood, if people here were part of it. Not just the planning, the actual work. If people put time into it, they take care of it differently afterward." He looked at her sideways. "Are you asking me to organize a volunteer build?" "I'm asking if you think it would land right coming from you. I don't have any standing here, you do." He was quiet for a long moment. Down the path, Noah was teaching Olivia to walk along the low concrete border that edged the path. Arms out, one foot in front of the other, and Olivia was concentrating with the pure, unself-conscious focus she brought to physical things, her tongue just visible at the corner of her mouth. "Money can build a playground," he said, not quite to her. More like thinking out loud. "Anybody can fund a thing. People remember who actually showed up." She looked at him. He was still watching the kids. "Yeah," she said. "I know." "I'll talk to some people," he said. It wasn't an enthusiastic yes. It wasn't a "you had me at hello." It was the yes of someone who means it, who has thought about whether they mean it, and who isn't going to dress it up as more than what it is. Which was, Serena thought, exactly what she had come to expect from him. She sat with that for a moment, in the pale November morning, on the cracked bench in the park that was about to become something better, and let herself feel something she'd almost forgotten the shape of. She was not going to call it happiness. It was too early, and she was too careful for that. But it was something in that direction, something in the general neighborhood of lightness, and it had been so long since she'd felt it without immediately bracing for it to be taken away that she sat very still, as though it were a bird that might startle. Down the path, Olivia made it 6 steps along the concrete border without falling, and Noah threw both arms up like she'd crossed a finish line, and Olivia turned around with her face open and bright, in a way Serena could see from 40 feet away. And Serena watched her daughter be, for a moment, just a kid. Just a kid on a cold morning having the uncomplicated experience of doing something small and getting it right. And she pressed her lips together and looked at the sky and breathed. Ethan, beside her, didn't say anything. He just passed her the thermos of coffee he'd brought, without looking over, the way you hand something to a person you've decided you trust. She took it. She held it with both hands. She did not look back at him, and he didn't look at her, and that was exactly right. Dolores Washington was 63 years old, ran the Greystone Neighbors Association out of a folding table in her living room, and had, by her own account, seen every flavor of outside money come into the neighborhood with good intentions and leave with excuses. She had a handshake like a contractor, and a gaze that went straight through whatever you were presenting to whatever you actually meant. And when she sat down across from Serena at the community meeting in the Greystone Rec Center on a Wednesday evening in early December, she did not smile first. "I know who you are," Dolores said. "I've been knowing. I just wanted to see if you'd come yourself or send somebody." "I came myself," Serena said. "Good." Dolores folded her hands on the table. "Last time somebody wanted to do something nice for this park, they sent a young man in a good suit who used the word community 14 times in 20 minutes, and we never saw him again. So I'm going to ask you straight, why this park? Why now? And don't tell me it's because you drove past it." Serena looked at her. "My daughter has been playing here on Saturday mornings. I sat on a bench with a crack down the back of it and watched the drainage flood the south end and looked at equipment that needed paint, and I have a foundation that could fix it, so I'm fixing it." Dolores studied her. "That's it?" "That's it." Another beat of silence. Then Dolores said, "All right, what are you planning to do about the lighting situation on the north path? Because that stretch goes dark by 4:30 in winter, and I've been telling the city for 6 years. Warm tone LEDs is full coverage to the north gate, timer system so they come on at dusk automatically. And the benches? New benches, 8 of them, treated hardwood, same placement as now, but added 2 near the equipment." Dolores looked at the paper in front of her, which Serena suspected she had already read twice before the meeting. "You've got Ethan Callahan coordinating the community build days." He agreed to. "Ethan's good people," Dolores said, in the tone of someone issuing a certification. "His father used to live on Callaway. Family's been in this neighborhood 40 years. She tapped the paper once with one finger. "If Ethan's involved, I'll get you your volunteers. But I want it understood that this is our park. Your money doesn't buy a naming right or a plaque or anything with your company's name on it." "I don't want any of that," Serena said. Dolores looked at her for a long moment. Then she smiled for the first time. Not a small smile, a real one, the kind that used her whole face. "Then we're going to get along fine." The first community build day was the second Saturday in December, cold and overcast, and Serena arrived at 7:45 to find Ethan already there with 2 other men from the neighborhood, laying out equipment and organizing paint cans with the efficient, unhurried competence of someone who had planned logistics under conditions considerably more stressful than a park renovation. She had not told him she was coming to help. She told Margaret she would observe, which was the word she used when she was about to do something and didn't want to commit to it in advance. He saw her, registered the work clothes she'd changed into, jeans, boots, an old jacket she'd found in the back of a closet, and he didn't say anything about it. He just handed her a pair of work gloves and pointed her toward a section of fence that needed sanding before it could be repainted. "Other end of that section," he said. "Work toward the middle. Dolores and her crew will take the far end." "Good morning to you too," she said. "Morning." He almost smiled. "There's coffee in the blue thermos by the bench if you want it before you start." She got the coffee. She started sanding. She was not good at it at first. She used too much pressure in the wrong places and not enough where it mattered. And after 20 minutes, her shoulders ached in a way that told her she used different muscles at a desk. But she figured out the rhythm of it, and there was something in the focused, physical repetitiveness of the work that she hadn't felt in years. The particular satisfaction of effort that shows itself immediately. where you can see the evidence of what you've done in the space between where you started and where you've gotten. By 9 o'clock, there were 32 people in the park. Neighbors she hadn't met, most of them, who showed up with their own supplies and organized themselves into working groups with the self-sufficient ease of people who already knew each other and how things got done. A group of older men handled the structural work, replacing the worn bolts on the climbing equipment, re-pouring concrete footings on the main post. A group of younger women took on the painting, spreading drop cloths and arguing cheerfully about whether the color for the equipment should be the green on the sample or something more saturated. Olivia was there, which Serena hadn't planned but which had become, she recognized, inevitable. Olivia had asked, via notebook, on Friday night, "Will Noah be there tomorrow?" And Noah had been there since 7:30, apparently having negotiated his own early appearance with his father, and he had given Olivia a brush almost before her coat was off. They were painting the low concrete border of the path. Noah was painting with the bold confidence of someone unconcerned with staying inside any line. Olivia was painting with precision, covering areas slowly and carefully, her tongue at the corner of her mouth. They were, Serena noted, clearly arguing about something. Noah gesturing at his own work and then at Olivia's. Olivia shaking her head with the firm patience of someone who is right and knows it. Ethan appeared beside Serena. He looked at the kids. "Noah wants to do it fast. Your daughter has opinions about quality." "She gets that from me," Serena said. "I can see that." She looked at him sideways. I was watching the park with that steady, proprietary attention. Not proprietary in a possessive sense, but in the way of someone who has a long history with a place and is tracking the changes being made to it against an internal map that goes back decades. "Your father's neighborhood," she said. He glanced at her. "Margaret told you." "Dolores, actually." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Right. Dolores knows everything about everybody." He was quiet for a moment. "Dad moved back to Ohio when Noah was born. Wanted to help after Patricia got sick. He stayed after..." He paused. "He's still there. Better for him. Better for Noah to have somebody close." She understood what he wasn't saying, that he had stayed here without his father nearby, working and raising Noah, and coming to this park on Saturday mornings without reinforcement. She didn't comment on it. She'd learned over these weeks that commenting on his hardships was a way to make him stop talking, whereas leaving room for the information sometimes produced more of it. "I grew up without a neighborhood," she said instead. "We moved a lot when I was a kid. My father's work." She looked at the park. "I think I never understood what it meant to have a place that was yours the way this is yours." Ethan thought about that. "It's not that deep, it's just a park." "No, it isn't," she said. "But okay." He looked at her then, and his expression did something she was learning to read. A slight softening around the eyes that was as close as he usually came to acknowledging that someone had said something that landed. Then a crash from the direction of the south fence, and two teenagers started arguing loudly, and Ethan excused himself and went to deal with it, and Serena put her gloves back on and went back to the fence, and the morning moved forward. She came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. It was not something she had planned in any strategic sense. It simply became a thing she did, the way certain habits establish themselves not through decision, but through the accumulative pull of wanting to go somewhere. She hired nobody to do her share of the work. She showed up in the old jacket, took the gloves Ethan handed her or found them herself when he was occupied elsewhere, and worked alongside people she was slowly learning the names and particulars of. There was Reuben, 71, who had grown up 2 streets over and had opinions about every structural change being made and was usually right. There was Carmen, who ran the laundromat and brought tamales to the second build Saturday that disappeared in 20 minutes. There was a man everyone called Big Terry who could lift equipment that 2 other men would have needed a dolly for, and who spoke in an almost inaudible murmur that Serena had to lean toward to hear, and once you could hear him, he was consistently the funniest person in the vicinity. She was not immediately accepted. That would be a cleaner story than what actually happened. What actually happened was that she was watched carefully by people who had good reason to watch carefully, and that the watching continued for longer than was comfortable, and that she made mistakes. She overrode a conversation once without meaning to, just the habit of the boardroom, the instinct to move a decision forward, and she saw the subtle flattening in the room afterward and understood that she had done something wrong and spent the drive home working out exactly what it was. She didn't do it again. Slowly, the watching shifted. Not into easy acceptance, more into a conditional, provisional, earned tolerance that she respected because it was honest. Dolores started including her in the planning conversations rather than briefing her on what had already been decided. Reuben argued with her directly about the bench placement instead of routing it through Ethan, which was, she gathered, a form of respect. And Ethan watched all of this from a certain remove, the way he watched most things, present, attentive, not intervening unless there was a specific reason to. She had the sense he'd known it would work out this way, and had simply waited for it to happen. "You were right," she told him one afternoon when they were stacking leftover lumber near the equipment shed, just the two of them, the build day winding down around them. "About which things specifically?" "People remember who showed up." She stacked a plank. "I've donated money to a lot of things. I'm good at structuring a donation so it actually goes where it's supposed to go, but I've never felt, I don't know, I've never felt part of the thing." Ethan stacked his side without comment for a moment. Then, "It's different when you can't buy your way out of the difficult part." She looked at him. "Money is efficient," he said. "Not critically, just as a fact. It solves the logistical problem without you having to be uncomfortable. But when you're here, and the work is harder than you expected, and somebody's annoyed at you for overstepping," he glanced at her. She knew he'd noticed. Of course he'd noticed. "You can't write a check to make that easier. You just have to stay in it." "Is that a military thing?" "No, it's just a real thing. The military just made me learn it faster." He set down the last plank, straightened, looked at the park. The new surface gleaming on the path, the freshly painted equipment, the 8 new benches set in clean concrete. "It looks good," he said. The same way he said everything, plainly, as though the observation was sufficient unto itself. "It looks really good," she said. He picked up his jacket from the fence post where he'd left it. "You coming Saturday?" She paused. Not because she was uncertain, but because she noticed he was asking, actually asking, as though it mattered to him what the answer was, as though he was tracking whether she'd be there. "Yeah," she said. "I'm coming Saturday." He nodded, put on the jacket, called Noah from across the park with 2 words that the kid immediately responded to, dropping what he was doing and collecting his things with the automatic compliance of a child who trusts the signal. Olivia was next to Noah. She stood up too, and she looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. "Good work today, Liv." Nobody called her Liv, not Serena, not the doctors, not anybody. It had just come out of his mouth, natural and unremarkable, the kind of nickname that happens when a person thinks of someone as familiar. Olivia stood very still for a second. Then she gave him a nod. A slow, serious nod, the kind you give when you have accepted something. Serena looked away. December became January. The park renovation completed on a Saturday in the middle of the month, and Dolores organized a small gathering. Not a ceremony, she was emphatic about that. Just people from the neighborhood coming to see what they'd built together. Someone brought a folding table and food. The kids ran on the new path surface and tested every piece of equipment in sequence. Big Terry said, in his barely audible way, that the benches were better than he'd expected, and Carmen told Serena that this meant the benches were excellent. Serena stood with a cup of coffee and watched the park full of people and felt something settle in her chest, something that had been agitated and unmoored for a long time. And she didn't entirely understand it except that she thought it had something to do with having made something that was specifically not about her. Ethan appeared beside her with his own coffee. "How does it feel?" "Strange," she said. "Good. Mostly strange." "That tracks." She looked at him. The winter light was low and thin, and it caught the gray at his temples, and she noticed, not for the first time but more clearly than before, that he was a good-looking man in a way that was entirely incidental to him, the way some people are simply what they are without positioning. He had lines around his eyes from years of squinting into distances she would never be able to imagine. His hands, wrapped around the coffee cup, were the hands of someone who worked with them. She looked away before he could catch her looking. "I want to do something else," she said, "after this." "What kind of something else?" "I don't know exactly. Not just check writing. Something—" She searched for the right word. "Something that requires people to actually be there, to show up." She paused. "I've been thinking about programs, families that are struggling, not just financially, but the way people struggle when they're isolated, when there's nobody in the room." He was quiet for a moment, listening. Daniel, my husband, he died, and I had money and resources and a team of people who were paid to help me manage things. And I still... She stopped, started again. I think about what it would have been like without any of that. Just alone with a silent kid and no way to navigate any of it. And a lot of people are actually in that position. A lot of people are, he said. I want to build something that actually addresses the isolation piece, not just the logistics. She paused. I'm not sure how yet. You'll figure it out, he said. No flattery in it, just the same uncomplicated delivery he gave everything, as though her figuring things out was a reliable and established fact, not a compliment he was paying her. She felt heat in her face that she was going to attribute entirely to the cold. You sound very confident about that. You renovated a park in 6 weeks and made Dolores Washington like you. I'd say your capabilities are pretty established at this point. Dolores doesn't like me. She's decided to provisionally not distrust me. He considered this. That's basically the same thing for Dolores. Serena laughed. And then, because she wasn't always prepared for how laughter moved through her when it came unexpectedly, the laugh caught and she had to take a breath. And for a moment she felt completely, transparently herself. Not a CEO, not a billionaire, not a mother managing a daughter's silence and her own grief and 50 obligations simultaneously. Just a person, standing in a cold park, laughing at something someone said. Ethan looked at her with an expression she didn't have a name for. Something quieter than his usual watchfulness. She composed herself. Sorry. Don't apologize for that, he said, simply, like it was obvious. She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. They stood in the winter afternoon and watched Olivia and Noah claim one of the new benches at the far end of the park and spread Olivia's notebook between them, Noah leaning over it with his forehead almost touching hers, both of them absorbed in something on the page. She's drawing the park, Serena said. She does that. Draws places she likes. Does she have a lot of places she likes? Serena was quiet for a moment. More than she used to. It was a Thursday in late January when it happened, and like most things that matter, it arrived without announcement. Ethan had invited them to dinner, not formally. He'd said it the way he said things, directly and without ceremony, at the park that Saturday. Noah's been asking if Olivia can come over sometime. I'll cook if you're not doing anything Thursday. And Serena had said yes before she'd thought about it, which was, she recognized, becoming a pattern with him. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of one of the buildings he managed. A 2-bedroom with good bones and the particular lived-in quality of a home that was functional rather than designed. There were Noah's drawings on the refrigerator held up by mismatched magnets. There was a bookshelf that was slightly overloaded, paperbacks stacked sideways on top of upright ones. The kitchen had a window over the sink that looked onto the back alley, and there was a plant on the sill that was not thriving but was clearly being kept alive by consistent attention. The plant is parsley, Noah announced, appearing from the hallway. We keep trying to grow it, but it's not going great. It's going fine, Ethan said from the kitchen. Dad, it's yellow. It's a yellow-green. That's just a different way of saying yellow. Olivia came in behind Serena and looked at the plant with the focused attention she gave all things she was inspecting. Then she looked at Noah and made a gesture, something with her hand that Serena didn't fully parse, but Noah apparently did. Yeah, I know, Noah said. I think it needs different dirt. Ethan looked over from the stove. How do you know what she said? Because it was obviously about the dirt, Noah said, with the patient logic of someone explaining something simple. Look at it. Ethan looked at the plant, then at Olivia. She gave a small, definitive nod. He turned back to the stove. Fine. We'll get different dirt. Dinner was pasta. Not fancy. Just pasta with a sauce he'd been simmering since he got home from work, and bread that was from the bakery 2 blocks over and was still warm. They sat around the kitchen table, which had a slight wobble that nobody commented on because it was clearly a known quantity, and Ethan poured water for everyone and wine for the adults, and they ate, and it was ordinary, which was the thing Serena hadn't expected, and which was, for that reason, the thing that undid her slightly. She had eaten at restaurants with 3 Michelin stars. She had hosted dinners where the table cost more than most cars, and the food had been chosen by people whose entire job was that choice. She had eaten alone in the back of cars so many times, the specific absence of company had become its own kind of ambient noise. This was four people around a wobbling table eating pasta in a kitchen where the plant was yellow-green, and it was the most settled she had felt during a meal in longer than she could accurately remember. Noah was telling a story about something that had happened at school, a dispute over a science fair project that had, by his account, involved considerable injustice. And he told it with great energy and a complete lack of concern for whether the injustice had been resolved, because clearly the point was the telling. Ethan listened and asked the right questions at the right moments, and Serena listened, and Olivia sat beside Noah and ate her pasta and laughed at the parts that were funny without making any sound, her shoulders shaking and her eyes bright. And then Noah said, "Olivia, did you ever do a science fair?" And Olivia shook her head, and Noah said, "We do them every year, and this year I'm doing mine on—" And he launched into an explanation, and Olivia leaned slightly toward him without seeming to notice she was doing it, and Serena watched her daughter lean toward a person and thought, that's what trust looks like in her body. She looked up and found Ethan watching her. He'd seen it too. He looked back at his plate without saying anything. He didn't have to. After dinner, Noah pulled Olivia into the living room to show her a model he was building, something from a kit, half assembled, and their voices, Noah's actual voice and Olivia's silence, drifted in from the other room in the comfortable background way of children who are occupied and not requiring supervision. Serena helped Ethan clear the table because she'd said she would, and they were quiet for a moment in the kitchen, moving around each other with the slight calibrating adjustments of two people in a small space who haven't done this before but are managing it without incident. "Thank you," she said. Thank you." "Noah wanted to," he said. "He's been asking for a month." "I know, Olivia too." She set plates in the sink. "They have their own thing, those two. It's kind of remarkable." "Kids sometimes." He ran the water. "They find each other." She stood at the counter and thought about how to say the next thing. She had been thinking about it for a while. Not how to say it exactly, but the acknowledgement underneath it, the thing she hadn't said directly yet. "I don't know how to tell you what these months have meant," she said. What this has been for her. For both of us." She paused. "I've had the best doctors in the country working with Olivia for 5 years. And I'm not—" "They tried. They're good at what they do. But you did something none of them did." "I didn't do anything specific," he said. "You treated her like a person." He turned off the water, turned to look at her. "She is a person," he said. "I know that. But the way you—" She stopped, started again. "You never tried to fix her. You never looked at her like she was something that needed solving. You were just there, and you talked to her like whatever she gave back was enough." He was quiet for a moment. "Because it is enough." Serena's throat was doing something inconvenient. "I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But I spent 5 years watching people look at her with this agenda, even kind agendas, and she felt every single one of them." She pressed her lips together. "You didn't have one." "I had a kid who lost his mother," Ethan said. Ethan said. "He went sideways for a while in ways that weren't silence but weren't easy either. I learned pretty fast that the most useful thing I could do was just keep showing up and not make him feel like a problem to solve." A pause. "It's not complicated." "It's exactly complicated," she said. "It's the thing that's hardest to do." He looked at her for a long moment. That particular look he had, not searching exactly, more like he was letting something land properly before responding. And then, from the living room, came a sound, a voice. Olivia's voice. Small, slightly rusty from 5 years of disuse. 2 words, clear enough to carry through the wall. "Thank you." Serena went absolutely still. Ethan went still too. A beat of silence. Then Noah's voice, uncomplicated and easy. "Sure, no problem. Okay, so this piece goes here." And just like that, Noah moved on, the way 8-year-olds move on, without spectacle, because Olivia had said a thing and he had responded to it, and that was the complete transaction, as far as he was concerned. Serena's hand was over her mouth. She was aware that she was shaking slightly, and that Ethan was very close, and that the kitchen was small, and that the 2 words her daughter had just spoken, the first words in 5 years, were "thank you," which was, of all the possible things, the most Olivia thing that could have been said, because Olivia had always been generous in that way, even before the silence, always the child who remembered. Ethan didn't touch her. He didn't speak. He just stood there, near enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and let her have the moment without trying to shape it. She breathed in through her nose, breathed out, took her hand away from her mouth. "I need a minute," she said. "Take it," he said. "I'll check on the kids." He walked out of the kitchen quietly, and Serena stood at the sink with the water still running a little, and looked at the yellow-green plant on the windowsill and felt 5 years of something move through her like weather. Not cleanly, not in a wave, but in the complicated, overlapping way that things release when they've been held very tight for a very long time. She was crying. She hadn't decided to cry. It was just happening, the way physical things happen when you've run out of the energy required to prevent them. She let it happen for exactly as long as it needed to. Then she turned off the water, dried her face on a dish towel, and went into the living room where Ethan was sitting on the floor next to the coffee table examining a piece of Noah's model with appropriate seriousness. And Olivia was beside Noah and completely absorbed, and everything was as ordinary as it had been 10 minutes ago, and that ordinariness was the most extraordinary thing Serena had ever seen. She sat on the couch behind Olivia and put her hand very lightly on her daughter's back, and Olivia leaned back against her legs without looking up from the model, and Serena sat in Ethan Callahan's living room with the wobbling coffee table and the overloaded bookshelf, and thought about what it meant that the greatest doctors in the world had spent 5 years and millions of dollars trying to bring her daughter back, and a man with grease-stained work gloves in a park with a broken bench and a yellow-green plant he refused to throw away had done it in 3 months simply by refusing to treat her like anything other than exactly who she was. She did not say this out loud. Some things are large enough that saying them would make them smaller. She just sat with her hand on her daughter's back and listened to Noah explain the model and felt the room hold all of them and said nothing, and it was enough. Olivia said 4 words the following morning. Serena was in the kitchen making coffee when Olivia came downstairs in her pajamas and her hair completely undone from its braid, the way it always was in the morning, and she stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Serena for a moment and then said, in that same small, slightly rusty voice, "Can I have toast?" Serena turned around very slowly, the way you move when you're afraid sudden motion might break something. "Yeah," she said, "you can have toast." She made the toast. She put it on the plate the way Olivia liked it, cut corner to corner, not straight across. A distinction Olivia had communicated years ago through a handwritten note with a very firm underline. And she set it on the table, and Olivia sat down and ate it, and neither of them said anything about what had just happened. Serena drank her coffee standing at the counter and looked out the window at the gray February morning and felt something in her chest that was too large to look at directly, the way you can't look directly at certain kinds of light. She called Dr. Pratt at 8:15. She spoke, Serena said, twice, once last night and once this morning. A pause on the other end. Then Dr. Pratt said, carefully, "Can you tell me the context?" Serena told her about the dinner, about Noah and the model, about the 2 words through the wall. She told her about the toast this morning. She kept her voice even and professional because if she used any other voice, she wasn't going to be able to finish the sentences. "This is significant," Dr. Pratt said. "Serena, this is genuinely significant, but I want to be careful about how we handle the next few weeks. The worst thing we can do is make her feel like the speaking is the thing we've been waiting for. Like she's finally done what she was supposed to do." "I know," Serena said. "I know. I'm not going to—" She stopped. "I didn't react. Last night. I made myself not react." "Good, that was right." A pause. "Can I ask, you said this happened during a dinner. Whose?" Serena was quiet for a moment. "A friend's. Someone Olivia is comfortable with?" "Yes?" She paused again. Yes, she's comfortable with him." Dr. Pratt let that sit for a beat in the way of someone who is professionally trained to let things sit. The environment mattered, the absence of clinical pressure, the presence of a peer, a familiar adult she trusts. Her nervous system felt safe enough. She paused. "That's not something you failed to provide, Serena. I want to say that clearly. You provided the conditions for her to find those people." Serena pressed the phone against her ear and looked at her coffee and said nothing. "Keep things as normal as possible," Dr. Pratt said. "If she speaks, respond naturally, the way you would with any child. Don't treat it as an event. And if she stops again, then she stops and we keep going, and we trust the trajectory. A beat. She said thank you. That's who she is. That's still in there, all of it. Serena got off the phone and stood in the kitchen for another few minutes, and then she washed her coffee cup and got dressed and took Olivia to school. And when she dropped her off and Olivia got out of the car and walked toward the building, Serena watched her go and thought about what Dr. Pratt had said. You provided the conditions for her to find those people. She hadn't done it on purpose. She'd stood in the rain outside a grocery store because she needed air, and a man had walked out and held an umbrella over a child he didn't know. And everything that followed had been one thing leading to the next without plan or design. She wasn't sure if that made it more or less meaningful. She decided it made it more. The words came back slowly, the way circulation returns to a limb that's been still too long. Prickling and uneven and occasionally absent, but consistently, reliably more present than before. Olivia didn't suddenly become a child who talked freely. She was still quiet by nature, still reached for the notebook first in situations where the words felt complicated. But she spoke to Serena in the mornings, small transactional sentences that were so straightforward and so completely normal that they made Serena want to sit on the kitchen floor and not get up for a while. My shoe is untied. Noah said there's a bird that lives in the park now. Can we have the soup again? She spoke to Noah easily, which surprised no one who had watched them together for any length of time. They had built their own communication system months before words entered it, and the words simply added a layer to something that was already functional. Noah received them exactly as he received everything, without ceremony, absorbed into the ongoing current of his thinking. She didn't speak to Ethan for another 3 weeks. Serena watched her gather herself toward it during that time. There was a quality to the way Olivia looked at him that was different from how she looked at others, more deliberate, like she was deciding something. And Serena did not rush it and did not mention it, following Dr. Pratt's guidance and her own instincts, which were increasingly aligned on this. It happened at the park, on a Saturday morning in mid-February, overcast and raw. Ethan had brought the materials for a birdhouse project, something Noah had been lobbying for since finding out there was in fact a bird living in the overgrown hedges near the north fence. A small brown situation that Noah had named Gerald with great confidence and zero ornithological basis. Ethan had the pieces pre-cut from a kit, simple enough for kids to assemble, and he and Noah were working at one of the new park benches while Serena watched from a few feet away with her coffee. Olivia was beside Noah, watching. She had the notebook in her lap, but she hadn't opened it. Ethan was explaining where the pieces went, practical, step by step, the way he explained things. And he handed Noah the hammer and watched him start the first nail with the patient attention of someone who has learned that children do better when you let them struggle for a reasonable amount of time before intervening. The nail went in crooked. Ethan said, "Try again, a little more angle." And Noah pulled the nail, repositioned, tried again. Olivia was watching Ethan's hands. After a few minutes, Ethan picked up the wood glue and said, without looking at either child in particular, "One of you want to do the gluing? It's easier than the nails." Noah was absorbed in a second nail. He didn't respond. Olivia looked at the glue, then at Ethan. "I'll do it," she said. Her voice was quiet and slightly uneven and completely clear. Ethan looked at her. His face didn't change in the way faces change when something significant has happened and a person wants to make sure you know they've registered it. He just looked at her the same way he always looked at her, steadily, without agenda, and said, "Good. I'll show you how much." He showed her. She applied the glue with the same focused precision she brought to painting, her tongue at the corner of her mouth. And when she was done, she looked up and Ethan said, "That's exactly right," and handed her the next piece. Serena had turned slightly away by then. She was looking at Gerald's hedge. She was breathing through her nose in the specific way she had developed for moments that required her to not make a visible scene in a public park. Behind her, she could hear Olivia asking a question about the birdhouse, something about the hole at the front, whether it needed to be a specific size, and Ethan answering it directly, and the conversation moving forward the way conversations do when both people in them are simply talking, without weight or history, just two people in a birdhouse on a cold Saturday morning. She wiped her eyes on her sleeve, turned back around. Nobody had noticed. Or if Ethan had, he gave no indication, which amounted to the same thing. February moved into March. and with it came the thaw that turned the park's new drainage system into something Reuben publicly and somewhat grudgingly admitted had been done correctly. The south end didn't flood. Dolores inspected it twice and told Serena, with the particular magnanimity of someone who had been skeptical and is acknowledging they were wrong without quite saying so, that it held up better than she'd expected. Serena was at the park most Saturdays now, sometimes during the week as well, in the evenings, when the new lighting made it usable in ways it hadn't been before. She would walk the path with Olivia, who had started bringing Gerald offerings, seeds she'd researched specifically, presented in a small dish she placed near the hedge with the serious intentionality of someone conducting a diplomatic relationship. And they would walk and sometimes talk and sometimes just move through the quiet of the evening park together. And it was, Serena had come to understand, the best part of her week. Her company was not suffering. She had a good team, people she'd built around herself over years, and she had always been better at delegation than she gave herself credit for. She was still working, still doing the work, still in the room for the decisions that required her specifically. But she was also, for the first time in longer than she could trace, not doing only that. She started building the program she'd talked about with Ethan in the winter. She brought in a consultant who specialized in social isolation research, a woman named Dr. Alima Ferreira, who had spent 15 years studying what she called connection infrastructure, the systems, formal and informal, that allow people to find each other in crisis. They spent 4 months in conversation before Serena started drafting the actual framework, because she'd learned enough about doing things right to know that the research had to come before the structure. She told Ethan about it over coffee at Maria's grocery store one afternoon in March. They'd started doing this occasionally, stopping in when their paths crossed near the neighborhood, which happened more often as the weeks went on. Maria always had the coffee on, and she had taken to producing a piece of whatever she'd baked that morning without being asked, which Serena had come to understand was Maria's version of a welcome. "It's called a connection infrastructure," Serena said, "which is a terrible name, and I'm going to change it. But the concept is families that are socially isolated after loss or crisis, single parents especially, building them practical support networks, not just referrals to services, but actual relationships." Ethan had his hands around his coffee cup. He was listening the way he listened, with his full attention and without performing it. "How do you build an actual relationship from a program?" he asked, not skeptically, genuinely. "That's what the hard part is. You can't manufacture it, but you can create the conditions, shared work, shared space, things like the park build. Situations where people have a reason to show up repeatedly to the same place and do something that matters." She paused. "I keep thinking about what you said. People remember who showed up. I keep coming back to that." "I say a lot of things," he said. "You say fewer things than most people I know, which is probably why they stick." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I want to start it in Greystone, with Dolores's involvement, if she'll do it, then scale from there if it works." He was quiet for a moment. "It'll work." "You sound sure." "You'll make it work." He said it the same way he said things, not as a compliment, as a fact. "You'll also be annoyed at the pace of it, but you'll make it work." She looked at him. "Am I that obvious?" "You move fast," he said. "It's not a criticism. It's just, you're used to things happening at the speed of what you can fund. People don't move at that speed. I know that." "You're getting better at it," he said, and that from him was something. She accepted it as such. Maria came out from behind the counter and refilled their cups without being asked, and gave Ethan a look that Serena couldn't fully parse, something fond and assessing simultaneously, and went back to what she was doing. Serena filed this away. Maria had been in the neighborhood longer than most people. She read people. The look she gave Ethan was the look of someone who sees something they had already seen coming. Serena didn't examine this too closely. She was in a board meeting in the 3rd week of March when Claire sent her an urgent message, a 2-word text that Serena had set as an override alert on her phone, meaning it came through regardless of whether she was silenced. The 2 words were Olivia. School. She was out of the boardroom in 45 seconds. The school nurse's office. Olivia was sitting on the cot with her arms wrapped around herself, not hurt, but clearly distressed, and a girl Serena didn't recognize was sitting in the hallway outside looking at her shoes. The principal, a measured woman named Ms. Adeyemi, met Serena at the door. "There was a situation at recess," Ms. Adeyemi said quietly. "Some of the children, It seems they were imitating Olivia, the way she communicates. A pause. Olivia heard them. Serena kept her face still. It required effort. She went into the nurse's office and sat next to Olivia on the cot and didn't say anything immediately. Olivia's jaw was tight in the way Serena recognized, the way she looked when something had gotten into a place that was hard to reach. She was holding herself with a controlled rigidity that Serena knew meant she was very close to a line. "Hi," Serena said. Olivia looked at the floor. "You don't have to tell me what happened. Ms. Adeyemi told me." Serena paused. "I want to know how you're doing." A long silence. Then Olivia said in a flat, careful voice, "They made fun of me." "I know." "Because I didn't talk." Another pause. "I do talk now, but they already decided." Serena felt something cold and specific move through her. Not at the children. They were children. They did what children did. But at the reality of what Olivia had just articulated. They already decided. The way people form their ideas about you in the shape you were, and then find it inconvenient when you change. "Some people are slow to update," Serena said. "It's their problem, not yours. I know that doesn't feel like anything useful right now." Olivia was quiet. Then, "Does it get better?" "Does what get better?" "People making up their minds about you wrong." Serena looked at her daughter, 7 years old, asking a question that most adults never got around to asking because they'd already given up on the answer. And she thought about the boardroom she'd left, the people in it who had formed their idea of her at some point and were consistently surprised when she operated outside it. "It gets easier to care less," she said, which was the most honest thing she had. Olivia thought about this. "Ethan doesn't care what people think," she said. "You can tell." Serena looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "He just does what he's doing." A pause. "He doesn't look around to see if people are watching." Serena thought about Ethan sanding a fence in the park rain, handing her gloves without looking over, sitting on a floor explaining a birdhouse like the most natural thing in the world. "You're right," she said. "He doesn't." "I want to be like that," Olivia said. "So do I," said Serena. They sat on the cot for a while longer. Then Olivia uncurled slightly and looked at Serena and said, "Can we go to the park after?" "Yeah," Serena said. "We can go to the park." She didn't tell Ethan about the school incident right away. She thought about it, and then she thought about why she was thinking about it, which was that he had become the person she ran things through. Not for advice exactly, but for the specific quality of attention he brought to things, the way it made her think more clearly to say them out loud to someone who would listen without an agenda. She told him on Saturday at the park, while the kids were at the far end doing something with Gerald's hedge that involved a considerable amount of low crouching and intense discussion. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "How'd she handle it?" "Better than I expected. She was upset, but she didn't go back under. She stayed out. She talked to me about it." Serena paused. "She said something about you." He looked at her. "She said she wants to be like you because you don't look around to see if people are watching." Something crossed his face that he controlled quickly, but she caught it. The brief, involuntary quality of someone receiving information that they hadn't braced for. "She's 7, he said. "She's not supposed to have that kind of read on people." "She's always been like that, even before. She noticed things." Serena looked at her daughter crouching near Gerald's hedge. "She noticed you, the first day, before I did." He didn't respond to that immediately. He was quiet with it, in the way he was quiet with things he was actually sitting with rather than just wading through. "She's going to be fine," he said finally. "I know. I mean it specifically, not just—" He paused. "She's got something in her. You can see it, the way she came back. That's not from therapy, and it's not from you holding it together for 5 years, though that matters. Don't—" He stopped again, slightly awkward, in the way he sometimes was when he'd said more than he planned to. She's got something solid in her." Serena looked at him. He was looking at the kids. "Thank you," she said, "for seeing that." He shrugged, in the minimal way of someone deflecting something they're not sure how to receive. "It's easy to see." They sat with that for a moment. Then Ethan said, "There's a charity event, Greystone Neighborhood Association, end of April. Dolores is doing a fundraiser for some additional park improvements. She wants to install a chess table area, because apparently this is important." A pause. She asked me to ask you if you'd come. Dolores could have asked me herself. She could have. She asked me too. Serena looked at him. There was something in the particular, slightly deliberate neutrality of his face that told her the message had been accurately relayed, but that the question behind it was his as much as Dolores's. I'll come, she said. He nodded, looked back at the kids. The afternoon moved on in the way of good afternoons, not quickly and without the awareness of moving. The night before the charity event, Serena was helping Olivia pick out what to wear, which had become a more involved process now that Olivia was talking again, because it turned out that Olivia had opinions about clothes that had previously been expressed only through a grading system of facial expressions, and verbal opinions were considerably more specific. Not the blue one, Olivia said. It makes me look like I'm going to a doctor. It's a dress. It doesn't look... It's the collar. The collar looks like a doctor. Serena looked at the dress. The collar was, she conceded internally, slightly clinical. Fine. The green? Olivia considered. Yes, but with the white shoes. The white shoes are going to get muddy. It's a park event. Then I'll be careful. This was so precisely the kind of thing Olivia had said at 2 years old, with the same confident and completely impractical reasoning, that Serena had to turn to the closet for a moment. Fine, she said. White shoes. She heard Olivia sit on the bed behind her. Then, Mom. Are you and Ethan friends? Serena kept her hands on the closet door. Yes. Like, just regular friends? Or... And in the pause was the very particular architecture of a child constructing a sentence around something they're not entirely sure is sayable. Just regular friends, Serena said, which was the kind of true statement that was also somewhat incomplete. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Noah says his dad is happier this year than before. Serena turned around. Olivia was sitting on the bed in her pajamas, looking at her shoes, her expression neutral in the way that meant she was actually paying close attention. Noah said that? Serena said. He said his dad smiles more. A pause. He said he doesn't know why, but it started in November. November. The rain. The grocery store. Serena sat down on the bed next to Olivia. She thought about what to say, and she landed, as she usually did with Olivia, on the thing that was actually true. I like Ethan very much, she said. He's one of the best people I've ever met. Olivia looked at her. Do you love him? The directness of it arrived like a cold splash. Olivia, you don't have to answer, Olivia said, with the uncanny poise she sometimes had. I was just asking. Serena looked at her daughter, 7 years old, white shoes for a muddy park. She sat very still for a moment, and in that stillness she did something she rarely allowed herself. She stopped managing the thought and just let it be there, plain and undefended. Do you love him? She didn't answer. She put her arm around Olivia's shoulders, and Olivia leaned into her, and they sat on the bed in the evening quiet. And Serena looked at the green dress hanging on the closet door and thought about November and the umbrella and the grocery store and the cracked bench and the wobbling kitchen table and a child's first words in 5 years and all the ordinary Saturdays that had accumulated into something she didn't have a clean name for but recognized in her body as something she was afraid to lose. Let's get you into bed, she said. Olivia went without argument, which meant she understood she'd said enough. Serena stood in the doorway after she'd turned off the light and watched her daughter's dark shape settle under the covers, and she thought, I am not going to answer that question tonight, which was also a kind of answer. The charity event was on a Saturday at the end of April, and the park looked, in the particular light of late afternoon, like the best version of itself. The new path catching the low sun, the equipment casting long shadows, the benches occupied by people in the easy, sprawling way of communities that are comfortable in their shared space. Dolores had organized it with the thoroughness she brought to everything, and there were tables of food and a small area where neighborhood kids were playing a kind of informal, rule-optional kickball that had been going on for most of the afternoon. Serena was there with Olivia. She'd worn the green dress too, in a kind of unconscious solidarity, which Olivia noticed and approved of without comment. They moved through the event, and Serena talked to people she knew now, Carmen, Ruben, Big Terry, a dozen others, and felt the particular texture of being somewhere she actually belonged, which was different from being somewhere she was powerful and better. Ethan found her near the north bench in the middle of the afternoon, looking at Gerald's hedge, which had been unmolested by any landscaping decisions because several people, including Dolores, had decided that Gerald's tenure predated the renovation and gave him squatter's rights. "Gerald's still there," Ethan said, coming to stand beside her. "Olivia checks on him every time." "I know. Noah gave him a name upgrade. Apparently Gerald is too ordinary." "What's the new name?" "Captain Gerald." A pause. "I didn't argue." She laughed. He half smiled. They stood in the afternoon light and watched the park doing exactly what a park was supposed to do. Then Serena heard a sound, feet on the path, running, the way kids run when they've decided something with great urgency. And Olivia appeared, flushed from the kickball, stopping in front of Ethan so abruptly that she nearly skidded. She looked up at him. The whole park was around them, noisy and ordinary, and nobody was watching, and Olivia looked at Ethan with an expression that Serena would remember for the rest of her life. Not childish, exactly, but very pure, like something that had been thought about carefully and was being delivered now because the moment was finally right. "Ethan," she said. "Hey." He looked down at her, that same steady look. "Will you marry my mom?" The noise of the park continued for another half-second, and then, in the immediate vicinity, went very quiet. Serena went completely still. She felt her face do something she had no control over. Ethan looked at Olivia, then he looked at Serena, then back at Olivia. His expression was not, she noted through her mortification, horrified. It was the expression of a man who has been genuinely and completely surprised, which was an expression she had never seen on him before, and which was, in its way, remarkable. Olivia wasn't done. "You make Mommy happy again," she said, "like how she used to be, and Noah needs us too." She paused, the pause of a 7-year-old who has prepared the speech and is delivering it with full sincerity. "We're better when we're all together, you can tell." The park around them had gone the specific quiet of people who are pretending not to listen, but absolutely are. Carmen, 3 feet away, had stopped moving entirely. Serena's eyes were burning. She was not going to cry in front of the entire Greystone neighborhood community. She was absolutely going to cry in front of the entire Greystone neighborhood community. Ethan crouched down so he was at Olivia's level. He looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, the way he always did, without any of the deflection he sometimes used with adults. "That," he said, "is the best thing anybody's said to me in a very long time." Olivia waited. She was not a child who accepted near answers. "I'm going to have to talk to your mom about that," he said. "That's a big question. You know that, right?" "I know," Olivia said, "but I figured someone had to ask." He looked up at Serena then, and she looked back at him, her eyes bright and her face completely beyond her management, and he held her gaze with the steady, specific, unperformed quality that was simply who he was. And in it she could read something she recognized because she had been carrying the same thing for months without letting herself name it. He stood. "Olivia," he said, straightening, "go find Noah." Olivia looked between them once. Then she turned and ran because she had done the thing she came to do and further presence was not required. Serena pressed her lips together. She heard Carmen somewhere behind her make a sound that was emphatically not quiet. "I'm sorry," Serena said, though she was not entirely sure what she was apologizing for. "I didn't. Don't apologize for that," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her the way he had in the kitchen the night Olivia first spoke, that quiet, landed quality, like something had arrived and he was letting it be where it was. He wasn't saying anything else yet. He was doing what he always did, staying in the moment without rushing it. Around them, the park continued. Somewhere across the path, Noah had found Olivia, and they were already back to the kickball, operating as though nothing seismic had just occurred, because as far as they were concerned, it hadn't. It was simply a thing that needed doing, and Olivia had done it. Serena stood in the late afternoon light with the man who had walked out of a grocery store in the rain and held an umbrella over her daughter, and she felt the full weight of the past 5 months settle around her like something coming to rest after a long time in motion. And she understood that whatever she said next would matter, so she didn't say anything right away. She just looked at him, and he looked at her. And that, for the moment, was where they were. Nobody said anything for a long moment. That was the thing Serena would remember later. Not the noise, Not the park around them full of people and afternoon light, but the specific quality of the silence that opened up between her and Ethan in the seconds after Olivia ran back to the kickball game. It was the kind of silence that has weight, the kind that means something is being decided, or acknowledged, or finally allowed to be what it already was. Carmen, who had been standing 3 feet away pretending to arrange something on a folding table, picked up her tray and walked away with the careful nonchalance of someone who is absolutely going to talk about this later, but understands this particular moment is not hers. Ethan looked at Serena. She looked back at him. Her face was still not entirely under her control, which she was aware of and couldn't do much about. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it like one. They walked the north path, the one the new lighting covered, the one Reuben had argued about and Ethan had described from memory like a man who had walked it 1,000 times. The park was full behind them, the kickball game audible, the smell of Carmen's food still in the air, and ahead of them the path curved toward the hedge where Captain Gerald lived in disputed peace. They walked without talking for long enough that the park noise softened behind them. Then Ethan said, "I want to say something and I need to say it straight because I don't know another way." "Okay," she said. He stopped walking. She stopped too. He was looking at the path ahead of them rather than at her, his hands in his jacket pockets, jaw set in the way of someone choosing words more carefully than usual. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what's been happening," he said, "between us. For a few months." He paused. "I'm not good at... I don't do things halfway. I never have. If something matters, it matters all the way, and that scares people sometimes. It scared Patricia in the beginning. She used to say I loved like I was afraid of running out of time for it." He stopped. "Let that sit. I don't bring that up to... It's just who I am. I can't offer something and then pull it back. So if I say this, I mean it entirely." Serena was looking at the side of his face. Her heart was doing something uncomfortable in her chest. "Olivia asked you a question," she said quietly. "She did." He turned and looked at her then, directly, without deflection, the way he looked at everything that mattered. "I'm not asking that question today. I want to be clear about that. What I'm saying is that whatever this is, us, these months, what it's turned into, I don't want to stand at the edge of it anymore and pretend I'm not standing at the edge of it." She held his gaze. "That's the most words I've ever heard you say at once." "I know." The corner of his mouth moved. "I'm aware it's a lot." "It's not too much," she said. And then, because she had spent months being precise in her cowardice about this, calling it friendship, calling it circumstance, calling it whatever name kept it at a manageable distance, she made herself be as direct as he was. "I've been afraid," she said. "Not of you, of what it means. To let something matter this much again." She paused. "Daniel was... losing him nearly took everything with it, and I rebuilt what I could. The company. Some version of functioning. And I told myself that was enough. And I believed it, because believing it was the only way to get through the day. And now," he said, "now I can't believe it anymore." She looked at him steadily. "You made it impossible to believe." He was quiet for a moment. The park lived behind them, ordinary and busy, and completely unaware of this conversation. "I'm not an easy life," he said. Not as a warning exactly, more as a fact he felt obligated to lay out. "I work with my hands. I live in an apartment with a plant that's mostly yellow. I can't offer you anything you don't already have access to. I know that. I'm saying it's not a selling point." "Ethan." She said his name with a patience she usually reserved for board meetings going in the wrong direction. "I have more money than I will ever reasonably spend. I have spent 5 years surrounded by resources and been profoundly alone in ways that money made worse, not better, because I could buy everything except the actual thing." She paused. "The plant is fine. I'll get it better soil." Something happened in his face. Not dramatically, just a shift, a small release of something he'd been holding in a controlled way for longer than this conversation. "I have a lot of feelings about you," he said, which was, she understood, as close as he was likely to get to poetry, and she found it more moving than poetry would have been. "I have a lot of feelings about you too," she said. He reached out and took her hand. Not with any particular ceremony, just reached out and took it, The way you take something you've been thinking about reaching for and have finally decided to reach for. And his hand was warm and slightly rough from the work he did, and she held it and looked at him in the late afternoon light of the park they had built together out of a cracked bench and a winter's worth of showing up. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Behind them, from the direction of the kickball game, Noah's voice rose briefly above the general noise in the specific register of a child who has scored something. And then Olivia's voice, clear and light and real, saying something back. They both turned at the sound of it, stood listening. Ethan's hand stayed in hers. Oh, he didn't propose for another 4 months. In those 4 months, several things happened, none of them dramatic in the cinematic sense, but all of them real and consequential in the ways that actually shape lives. Serena and Ethan stopped pretending that the thing between them was something other than what it was, which changed nothing about the surface of their days and everything about the texture of them. He still came to the park on Saturday mornings. She still showed up in the old jacket. The difference was that they stopped monitoring the distance between themselves and started just being in the same place without engineering it or apologizing for it. Noah found out the way children find out things that adults imagine they're concealing, which is to say he had already known for some time and simply waited for the adults to sort themselves out. He told Ethan, with the philosophical acceptance of an 8-year-old who has made peace with the situation, "I figured you stopped being weird about it." Ethan did not ask what weird looked like from the outside. He decided some information was better left ungathered. Olivia's voice continued its return, which was not a steady upward line, but a real process with bad days in it. Days when she went back to the notebook, when something was too large for words, or when she was tired in the specific way that trauma residue makes people tired, a tiredness that has nothing to do with sleep. Dr. Pratt called these days consolidation days, which was a better name for them than bad days, and Serena learned to treat them as such, not as setbacks, not as evidence of failure, just as part of the actual shape of the thing. Ethan, when Olivia had consolidation days, did not alter his behavior in any perceptible way. I was the same. This was, Serena came to understand, the most useful thing a person could be. The program she'd been building with Dr. Ferreira launched in Greystone in June. They called it the Anchor Program, which was Dolores' suggestion, and which Serena accepted immediately because it was better than anything she'd come up with. The premise was exactly what she'd described to Ethan in the winter, creating structured opportunities for isolated families to build real relationships through shared work and shared space, rather than through referrals and resource distribution. The first cohort was 12 families. Dolores ran the coordination with the efficiency of a woman who had been doing community organizing since before Serena was born and found most institutional processes frustratingly slow. Margaret managed the foundation side of it. Ethan helped with the physical infrastructure, setting up the shared workshop space, the community garden plot that was Ruben's domain, the rotation of shared childcare that Big Terry had, with great seriousness and surprising skill, agreed to help organize. By August, 2 of the families from the first cohort had moved into apartments in the same building, not because anyone had arranged it, but because they'd wanted to. One of the fathers had gotten a job through a connection he'd made in the workshop. A woman named Sandra, who had arrived at the first session barely speaking and sitting as close to the door as possible, was now leading the second cohort's orientation. Serena watched this from what she'd learned to call a sufficient distance, close enough to understand what was happening, far enough to not be the gravitational center of it, and felt something that she recognized now as the particular satisfaction of work that has gotten out of your hands and become its own thing. She told Ethan about Sandra on a Thursday evening in August, sitting on the back steps of his apartment building while the kids were inside doing something involving the model Noah had finally finished, and an elaborate scenario that required its display from multiple angles. The summer evening was warm and the alley behind the building was unremarkable. A dumpster, someone's bicycle leaning against the wall, a cat that lived in the building and had never been formally claimed by anyone. She was barely there in May, Serena said. Now she's running orientation. She told the new families, she said, the most important thing they give you here is a reason to come back next week. That's it. That's the whole thing. Ethan had his forearms on his knees, looking at the alley with the comfortable ease of someone who doesn't need a view to enjoy a good evening. That's the whole thing, he agreed. I keep waiting for the part where I feel like I've done enough, Serena said. I don't think that part comes. Probably not. He glanced at her. Would you want it to? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. I'd get restless. I know. She looked at him. Is that going to be a problem? Long term. It was the first time either of them had used that phrase, long term, out loud, and it arrived in the air between them with a weight that both of them registered and neither acknowledged directly. No, he said. I like watching you work. A pause. I like watching you build things. You do it differently now than you did in November. How? You slow down before you decide. He considered. Not a lot, but some. You look around the room more. She thought about the board meetings she'd sat in since November, the way she'd started leaving space before speaking, the way the decisions she was least sure of were the ones she'd been right to wait on. I learned that from you, she said. He shook his head slightly. You always knew how to do it. You just needed to be somewhere that made it feel safe to try. She didn't respond to that because the accuracy of it was a little much. She looked at the cat, which had settled on top of the bicycle seat with the absolute sovereignty of an animal that understands property law doesn't apply to it. Ethan, she said. Yeah. I'm not afraid anymore. She said it plainly. I was. I told you that. But I'm not now. She paused. I just wanted you to know that. He looked at her for a long time. That particular quality, taking something in all the way before responding to it. Good, he said, which was all he said. But the way he said it, low and quiet and with something underneath it that he didn't dress up in any additional words, was enough. He proposed on a Saturday in September at the park at 7:45 in the morning before anyone else arrived. She had known something was different the moment she walked through the gate because Ethan was already there, not unusual, but he was standing on the path near the north bench instead of doing anything useful, which was unusual enough that she noticed it immediately. Olivia was with her. She stopped when Serena stopped and looked at Ethan and then looked up at Serena with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not succeeding. Did you know about this? Serena said. Olivia looked at the sky. Olivia. Noah told me, Olivia said. I didn't tell you. That's the same thing. It's technically not, Olivia said, and walked ahead toward Ethan with the purposeful stride of someone who has been waiting for this for months and has excellent patience for a 7-year-old but is not made of stone. Serena followed. Ethan watched her come down the path. He was in the canvas jacket and the work boots, and he had not attempted to look any different from how he always looked, which was exactly right, and she loved him for it so specifically in that moment that it felt like a physical fact. There were no flowers, no setup, no scene. The park was empty, and the morning was cool, and the light was the particular thin gold of early September, and Noah was sitting on the north bench with his shoes unlaced and his hands in his pockets, pretending to look at Captain Gerald's hedge. Ethan said, I've been thinking about how to do this for 2 months. Okay, she said. I thought about a restaurant, but you don't need that. I don't. I thought about something with, I don't know, whatever people do. I looked it up. A pause that was as close to sheepish as she had ever seen him get. It all seemed like it was about the event rather than the thing. It does seem that way, she said. So, he reached into his jacket pocket. He produced a ring, not a box, just the ring, held between his thumb and forefinger, which was so exactly him that she felt her throat close. It was simple and good. A plain band with a single stone, nothing architectural about it. Just something chosen because it was right rather than because it was impressive. This is the place where it started, he said. Or close enough. This is where I know you. He paused. I want to keep knowing you. For all of it. The building and the restlessness and the bad days, Olivia's and yours and mine. I want to be in the room for all of it. He looked at her steadily. So, will you? Not will you marry me with the full formal ceremony of the question, just will you, as though the specific terms were already understood by both of them, and what remained was only the answer. Serena looked at him. She was aware that her eyes were doing something inconvenient, and that Noah had abandoned the pretense of looking at the hedge and was watching openly, and that behind her she could hear Olivia not breathing. Yes, she said. Obviously, yes. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. She suspected he had found out the size through means she wasn't going to examine too closely, possibly involving Olivia, who was going to be insufferable about this. He was right about that. Olivia made a sound that was half laugh and half something that had no name, and then she was next to Serena. And Serena put her arm around her and held her tight. And Noah came off the bench and stood next to his father with his hands in his pockets, trying very hard to look like he hadn't been invested in this outcome for months, and mostly failing. Ethan put his hand on Noah's shoulder. They stood in the September park, the four of them, on the path that had been repaired and lit and argued over and built by a community that had become part of their story. And it was not a perfect moment. Olivia had a tangled shoelace and Noah's shirt was on inside out, which nobody had noticed. And Serena's eyes were red and Ethan looked the way he always looked, steady and slightly unpolished and completely himself. It was, she thought, exactly right. They married in November. Exactly 1 year, almost to the week, from the afternoon of the rain in the grocery store and the umbrella and the 2 words, kids shouldn't have to face storms alone, that had started everything. The ceremony was at the park. This had been Olivia's suggestion, delivered at the kitchen table one evening in September, with the matter-of-fact certainty she brought to things she had decided. It should be at this park, she said, because that's where it happened. And nobody had argued because she was right, and because Dolores, when informed of this plan, had immediately begun organizing it with an efficiency that made the whole thing feel like it had always been decided. It was not a large wedding, it was not a small wedding. It was the Greystone neighborhood, which meant it was exactly the right size. All the people who had been part of what this year had built, gathered in the space they'd built together, in the November afternoon light that came in low and gold, the way it had the first day she'd seen Ethan standing in it with grease on his hands, and no particular concern about who was watching. Dolores had commandeered the setup with considerable authority. Carmen had made food. Enough food, she said, for twice as many people, because you never know and running out is not acceptable. Reuben had been consulted about the arrangement of the chairs and had opinions, and most of them were right. Big Terry had carried approximately everything heavy without being asked and declined all acknowledgement of this with a barely audible, "That's fine." That was his version of "you're welcome." Noah stood next to Ethan. He had combed his hair for the occasion, which represented, Ethan told Serena quietly before it started, a significant personal sacrifice. I was wearing a tie that he had chosen himself, green, slightly too wide for current fashion, and completely right for Noah. And he stood with his hands clasped in front of him with the serious dignity of someone doing important work, which was exactly what he was doing. Olivia stood next to Serena. She had chosen her own dress too, and she had chosen well, something simple and dark green that she was going to grow out of in 3 months, and that she wore right now as though she had been built for it. Her hair was braided properly, for once, which was Serena's contribution, and she held Serena's hand on the walk from the park gate to the spot where Ethan was standing, and then she let it go and went to stand on Serena's left, and stood up very straight. There was no officiant in the traditional sense. A friend of Ethan's from the neighborhood, a quiet man named Joseph, who had gotten certified online for exactly this purpose, and took it seriously, stood in front of them with a piece of paper he'd clearly practiced from, but didn't read from, and said what needed to be said in plain language that didn't have any of the usual ceremony to it. Ethan and Serena had written their own words. Neither of them had told the other what they were going to say. Ethan went first. He looked at her and didn't look at the piece of paper he'd folded in his jacket pocket. "I was not looking for this," he said. "I want to say that clearly, not as a criticism of you, Ma, not even close, but because I think you need to know that what happened between us wasn't something I planned or worked toward. I had made my peace with a certain kind of life, a smaller one. And then you were standing in the rain outside Maria's store with your daughter, and I held an umbrella over her, and that was all I meant to do." A pause. He wasn't a man who paused for effect. He paused because he was thinking. I don't know what it means that something that simple turned into this. But I'm done trying to understand it, and I've decided to just be in it. He looked at her steadily. "I promise to show up. That's it. That's what I have. I promise to keep showing up on the good days and the bad ones, and the days that are just ordinary and don't require anything from either of us. I promise to be in the room." His voice was level throughout, which she knew cost him something. and I promise to treat Olivia like what she is." He didn't finish that sentence. He didn't have to. Serena took a breath. "I spent 5 years believing that I had put the most important things away," she said, "that I had filed them somewhere safe and locked the drawer, and what was left was enough. It works, that approach. You can live that way. You can even think you're fine." She paused. "And then someone who didn't know who I was handed me an umbrella, and his kid talked to my kid about a bicycle chain, and I sat on a bench with a crack in the back of it and watched a man who owns almost nothing give my daughter the one thing I couldn't buy her." She stopped. "You gave her back to herself. I don't know how to say that without it sounding like more than it is, so I'll just say it directly. You gave her back to herself, and in doing that you gave her back to me. And I don't have a word for that. I don't have anything that covers it." She looked at him. "So I'll just say, I love you, and I'm not afraid of it. And whatever we're building next, I want to build it with you, all of it, the yellow plant and the wobbling table and Noah's inside-out shirts and the mornings in the park, and every ordinary, imperfect, completely sufficient day." She paused once more. "You told me once that people remember who showed up. I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing up for you." The park was very quiet. Then Noah sniffed loudly, which broke the silence in the best possible way, and he said, "I'm not crying, something's in my eye." And Olivia, standing straight as a post beside Serena, said flatly, "Both your eyes?" Which made the entire Greystone neighborhood community laugh in the warm, collective way of people who are in the same room for a good reason and know it. Ethan looked at Serena, and his expression did all the things his voice usually didn't. They said the formal words. Joseph pronounced them married, somewhat redundantly by that point. Ethan kissed her on the north path of the Callaway Street Park, which had a new surface and proper drainage and 8 hardwood benches, and somewhere in the hedge behind them, Captain Gerald rustled and went still. What came after was not a fairy tale, because neither of them had the temperament for one. There was the logistical reality of blending 2 households, which involved more conversations about drawer space than Serena had anticipated, and a negotiation about the plant, which she did repot, in better soil, and which responded immediately with new growth that Noah regarded as a personal vindication, and a period of adjustment during which Noah and Olivia, who had seemed effortlessly compatible at the park and at dinner, discovered that living in the same space revealed friction points that casual proximity hadn't. They fought sometimes, the way siblings fight, not cruelly, but specifically, about things that were really about other things, and they worked through it the way kids work through things when the adults around them don't catastrophize it. Olivia's voice was fully back by December, not in the sense that she became someone who talked constantly. She was still herself, still more inclined to observe than to narrate, still reaching for the notebook in complicated moments. But she spoke. She argued. She told Noah when he was wrong, which was often enough to keep the practice current. She said "I love you" to Serena on a Tuesday morning in a completely unremarkable way, as though she had been saying it all along, and Serena said it back in the same register, and they ate their toast and went about the day. And it was ordinary in the specific way that only the very hard-won things get to be. Ethan moved into Serena's building because the math of the kids' schools and the Foundation's Greystone office made that the sensible choice, though he kept his management contract for the Callaway Street buildings and went there most mornings before she was up, which she discovered and found completely unsurprising. He was a man who worked with his hands and needed to be useful in direct, physical ways, and she was a woman who built systems and then let them run. And these were different orientations that required negotiation, but also, she found, fit together in ways that weren't immediately obvious from the outside. He was not always easy to live with. He had a specific way of doing certain things and a limited tolerance for the number of people in their kitchen on a weeknight, which collided occasionally with Serena's habit of working late with colleagues who ended up staying for dinner. He went quiet sometimes, in a way that had nothing to do with her but that she had to remind herself of periodically in the early months, before she learned the particular quality of his quietness and could read the difference between the quiet that needed space and the quiet that welcomed company. She was not always easy to live with either. She accelerated past agreements sometimes, moving a decision forward with the instinct of someone who had been the sole authority in her life for 5 years and had to consciously redistribute that habit. She worked too much, still, not to the exclusion of everything else as she once had, but enough that it was sometimes the third person in the room. She and Ethan argued about it exactly twice, both times at the kitchen table, both times ending not in resolution, but in the practical truths of two people who understand each other well enough to stop before the thing becomes something they can't come back from. The Anchor program completed its first full year in June and served 47 families. Serena and Dr. Ferreira spent 3 months documenting what had worked and what hadn't, and then she presented the model to her foundation board with the proposal to replicate it in 4 other cities. The board, who were careful people with good instincts, said, 3 cities, let's evaluate before 4. Serena said, 3, agreed, and meant it. She had learned to mean it. Dolores attended the Anchor program's first anniversary gathering and gave a speech that included the line, "When Serena Whitmore first came to this neighborhood, I didn't trust her." Pause. I was wrong. Which was, everyone who knew Dolores understood the rarest and most valuable thing she could offer anyone. Well, on the first Saturday in November, exactly 2 years from the rain in the umbrella and the grocery store, Serena and Ethan walked to the park in the morning. The kids were with them, Olivia and Noah, walking ahead on the path in the low autumn light, arguing about something with the unselfconscious absorption of children who have forgotten there are adults nearby, which was the best sign that things were right. Serena and Ethan walked behind them. Their hands were in their coat pockets, and their shoulders were close together in the particular way of people who have shared enough cold mornings that the proximity is simply natural. They passed the bench, the cracked one, which had been repaired when the new benches went in, but which had been kept at Reuben's insistence, on the grounds that it had standing in the neighborhood that newer benches hadn't earned. The crack was still there, filled and sealed but visible, a line running down the back of it that told you the history of the thing. Ethan stopped at it, looked at it for a moment. 2 years ago I sat on that bench with a woman I'd just met, he said, and she told me she was going to fix the park. I said I was thinking about it, Serena said. You already knew you were going to do it. He glanced at her. I could tell. You had that look. What look? The look like you've already decided and you're just being polite about it. A pause. I see it on Olivia sometimes. She laughed. It came out the way laughter did now, easily, without the slightly startled quality it used to have, as though she'd forgotten it was available. She does have that look, she said. I knew from that bench, he said. I didn't know what it was going to become, but I knew you were someone I wanted to keep talking to. She looked at him. You were very careful not to show it. I was raised not to be obvious about things. He looked at the bench. Also, you were terrifying. I was not terrifying. You were. He said it without apology. You had this, you were managing 17 things at once and you didn't need anything, and you said, I'm thinking about it like you'd already consulted 12 experts. He paused. Terrifying, in a good way. She looked at the bench. 2 years of Saturday mornings. Reuben's arguments, Carmen's tamales, Dolores's handshake, Gerald's hedge, the yellow-green plant now thriving on the kitchen windowsill in its better soil. Olivia's voice, Noah's inside-out shirts, a wobbling table that they had not fixed because at some point it had become a feature rather than a flaw. The world knew Serena Whitmore as the woman who had built a technology empire at 30. The magazines ran the same narrative they'd always run, the ambition, the discipline, the numbers. She didn't correct them. The numbers were real and the work was real, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But the people who had actually watched her year unfold knew a different version of the same story. They had watched a woman who had every resource available to her discover, at the corner of Callaway and Westfield in the rain, that the thing she needed most was not something she could purchase or structure or scale. They had watched a park get built not by a foundation's money alone, but by 32 people on a cold Saturday with paint and sore shoulders and strong opinions about bench placement. They had watched a child speak 2 words through a kitchen wall and a room of adults go completely still with the weight of it. And occasionally, on a Saturday morning, they could see all 4 of them on the north path. The 2 kids ahead, the adults behind, everybody slightly loud and not particularly coordinated, which was the true texture of a family that is actually working rather than performing. Years later, when people asked Serena what had changed her life, she thought about how to answer it in a way that was accurate. Not the rain, not the umbrella, not the moment in the park when Olivia's voice came back through the kitchen wall, though that was the moment she thought of most often and most tenderly. Not even Olivia's question, which she had replayed many times. The pure audacity of it, the 7-year-old logic that cut through everything two adults had spent months carefully, cautiously negotiating around. What had actually changed her life was simpler and harder to explain than any single moment. She had been a woman who had learned from necessity to solve everything alone. And then she had stopped. Not all at once, gradually, in increments, one cold Saturday at a time. She had stopped needing to have the answer before she arrived. She had stopped measuring the distance between herself and everything she was afraid to lose. She had learned to hand someone a thermos back without having to understand completely why it felt like home to do it. The real change was not something that happened to her. It was something she had slowly, imperfectly, genuinely allowed. Sometimes the greatest rescue, she had heard someone say once, a woman at an anchor program session talking about what the year had meant to her, is just someone sitting down next to you and not leaving. Serena thought that was right. She thought about this cracked bench and the steady man and the child who had brought her own voice back by choosing where to put her silence. And she thought, yes, that's exactly right. On the path ahead of them, Olivia turned and called back. Mom, Noah says Captain Gerald moved. Gerald doesn't move, Noah said. I said he might have expanded his territory. That's moving. It's really not. It's a type of moving. Ethan put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled, sharp and short, the way he'd learned in the Navy, and which still worked on their children with unreasonable reliability. Both kids stopped and turned. Gerald, he said, does what Gerald does. Can we just let him have it? A pause. Then Olivia, solemnly, fine. Noah, fine. They turned back around and continued their argument in lower voices that were still completely audible. Ethan looked at Serena. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. They walked on, into the November morning, into all the ordinary and sufficient